to Wake Up Sierra Leone on AYV Television. Don't forget to send your comments and questions to the AYV Sierra Leone Facebook page. And as usual, we'll make time to hear your views.
All right, this morning, our first conversation. For nearly 5 decades, the United States has issued the country report on the human rights practices, which strive to provide a factual and objective record on the status of human rights worldwide. In 2021, the report covered 198 countries and territories. In Sierra Leone, the report stated there are significant human rights issues, including credible reports of unlawful or arbitrary killings by the government, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment by government or on behalf of government, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, arbitrary arrest or detention, serious government corruption, existence of laws criminalizing consensual same-sex conduct between adults, although the laws were not enforced, and existence of the worst forms of child labor. The report further noted many other things which we're here this morning to discuss. And to discuss the report, we have with us Sarah Van Horn, the Public Relations Officer from the U.S. Embassy in Freetown, and we also have with us Victor Lansana, who is the Vice Chairperson of the Sierra Leone Human Rights Commission. Good morning and welcome to Wake Up Sierra Leone.
Good morning.
All right. Hope you had a wonderful holiday. Hope you enjoyed your holidays. And we're getting into serious things now. You've been publishing the State of Human Rights report globally, and the findings in Sierra Leone are pretty much worrisome if we're to go by the things you've highlighted in your report. But first off, when you conduct these reports or these surveys, what specifically do you use as a form of methodology to get your facts?
Well, thank you so much. And as you say, we've been doing this for quite some time, for almost 50 years now. And this last year, we did it in 198 countries, and methodology was the same across all of those countries. So what we look at is, what are the facts, what has happened in different sectors? So we look at, respect for integrity of the person. That's were people unlawfully killed? Were people detained? We look at respect for civil liberties. That's things like expression of the media. That's freedom of religion. Right. We also look at freedom to participate in the political process. Are people allowed to vote? Are elections free and fair? Corruption and lack of transparency in the government. Whether or not the government allows investigations to take place on human rights issues. Right. Whether there's discrimination or societal abuses, and what is the status of workers' rights, labor rights. So those same 7 categories are looked at across all of the reports. And the reports are compiled by U.S. embassies across the world, and we get the information by speaking with representatives of the government, but also speaking with non-government organizations, with charitable organizations, with civil society activists, and we pull together a report that way. It's important to note that the report is not an analysis and it's not a judgment. So it's trying, as you said earlier, to pull together the objective facts. These are the things that happened. This law exists, this law does not exist. There were arbitrary arrests, there were not arbitrary arrests. It's not supposed to provide judgment, analysis, or policy recommendations per se. Right. It's also not supposed to be a complete report of everything that happened. So there are a couple of cases that were highlighted as good examples, illustrative examples of what's going on, but it's not supposed to catalog every single human rights issue or situation that occurred. So that's how our methodology works on that.
Do you just rely on speaking to government officials, to non-governmental organizations, to individuals in the different areas? I'm asking because, for example, in some instances, some situations might require your presence to validate things like that. For example, when you talk about prisons, you have to ensure that you go and assess yourself. So do you on a normal day do that?
Yeah, for sure. So various people in the embassy get called for their work in different parts of the country, right? So there were by-elections recently, and we had embassy observers there. We have the consular section in the U.S. Embassy that's responsible for working with American Citizen Services, and so if someone is arrested, they will go and visit them, and they see what's going on in the prison there. Right. We also go for meetings and travel up country for a variety of different ways. So we're a small team. We're actually a surprisingly small embassy, so we can't be everywhere at once, but we do base the information on the information that we have seen, but also with conversations with NGOs, with other like-minded partners. We look at other reports, we talk with the government, and so we pull it together from all these different sources.
Right. And as Samuel mentioned, the prisons and you know, taking a look at what's happening there and speaking to government officials, ministries, departments, and agencies, looking at the reports on, you know, pre-trial detention. The report mentions Mohammed Kamarimba's case, but it states here that he was released on September 7th. Is there a reason why you've chosen, you know, that wording? Because he has been granted bail, but he is still released.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up. So the report looks at a distinct period of time. So we were just looking at the 2021 reporting period, and when the report was compiled, the information had been received that he would be granted bail, and so the report was compiled with the assumption that he would then get bail and be released. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. But that was the status of the information as we saw it when the report was compiled. So likely in next year's report, that case will then be further updated.
Right, and isn't this going to affect, you know, the perception of what's happening in Sierra Leone? Because this is a report that other countries are going to look at. This is a report that's going to be used, whether whether that's the intention behind it or not, but that it's going to be used to assess human rights issues. So stating that someone has been released when they're not could be a sticky situation to be in.
So I think, again, it's important to look at, these are supposed to be illustrative cases, and the illustrative case that particular case was showing was around the prison conditions in Sierra Leone. So regardless on sort of where he is now, that information is still valid, that information stays. And, you know, he was granted bail. In the end, that's not sort of what happened. So, but I would look at sort of the report as a capture of trends and look at sort of those larger trend lines as opposed to sort of this individual case, that individual case. And if you look at the trend lines, yes, there are some concerning issues, but we also noted in the report that there were some attempts at reform after issues were raised, that some officials involved in some of these things, or police officers involved in some of the issues that were noted in the report, did stand trial or did lose their jobs. So there are some areas of concern, as there are in many countries, right? There isn't, including the U.S. is not perfect either. So we don't come and claim that we have all of the answers. But it is important to look at that balance and see even the fact that we're able to talk about these things and to talk about them openly and with transparency is, I think, a good sign.
Right. So I'm going to throw the question over to Victor. As you mentioned, the police. There are illustrative cases the U.S. has mentioned in this report. I think one issue that stood out is the excessive use of force by the police, whereas the U.S. State Department is talking about reforms that need to be taken with the Sierra Leone police. The report also mentions Amnesty International's report, which says there has been improvements in the way the police operates, with the consequences for police officers who misuse their authority. But it would be good to hear from the Human Rights Commission on what what your position is on this issue.
Yeah, thank you very much for having Human Rights Commission in your program. It's always a pleasure for us. First of all, we welcome this report from the U.S. Embassy.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's the more the merrier. The Human Rights Commission does not claim that we can do everything, and so when we have more parties coming into into play to ensure that we are able to protect human rights for everybody in this country, it's really laudable. So we commend their reports and we welcome their reports. We always continue to work with them. As you can see in the reports, several references were made to the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the Commission will attest to the fact that yes, there has been some improvement in terms of police leadership. Now we are seeing instances where the police will dismiss, it will put them, those who are actually involved in misconduct, we put them on suspensions, and so on and so forth. Some will be even charged to court. So it tells you of the progress that the Human Rights Commission is actually making, because we ensure that we are always on the neck of the police. Because for us, it doesn't matter where coming from, we are working for the people of this country.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's the police, whether it's the army, whether it's whichever ministry or whichever MDA, we are always willing and ready to ensure that we hold them to account, we get them to be responsible, because we all know that this is a social contract. The government has a responsibility, the government has a state obligation to respect, to protect, and to fulfill human rights. And if these state obligations are not met, and then it means there is a serious breach. And so that is why for us we continue to engage the police to make sure that they are able to operate within the limits of the law. Human rights are given by law. Any human right you talk about is given by law. And so it is only law that could limit human rights, that could restrict human rights. And that is why when you talk about the excessive use of force of the police, the Human Rights Commission, you are aware of that, is now conducting what we call a public inquiry into the conduct of public, police officers and whether the police, the military, general law enforcement officers, 5 categories of them, including even the police and police, and road safety corps. So it tells you that the police are beginning to understand the value of their work, because for us, there could be no better human rights work than protecting lives and property. The police will tell you that our job is to protect lives and property. Mm-hmm. And it tells you, it's very clear that the biggest human rights is life. And so if we are responsible to protect lives and property, then we expect you to be very professional in doing that. We expect you to ensure that you are able to actually conduct yourself in a way where there will be minimal incidents. But over the years, we've seen how the police have been actually conducting themselves, and we believe that it is high time for them to start thinking of becoming very much more professional. So the Human Rights Commission is very happy that the U.S. Embassy is assisting in a way the Human Rights Commission to bring out these issues.
Is the Human Rights Commission in any way involved in investigating some of these issues that come up with the police? I know the Sierra Leone Police Complaints Board exists. What role does the HRCSL play in the Complaints Board?
Yes, we are. The Commission is actually a member of the board. But apart from being a member of the board of the IPCB, we are an independent institution that has the mandate to protect and promote human rights, and that we do that in several ways. We do investigations, so we investigate the conduct of the police on a daily basis, and then we make recommendations to the government to engage the police themselves as an institution to get them to understand why they should actually improve on their work. So apart from the IPCB, the Commission itself is an independent institution that does its work, devoid of any interference, devoid of whether there is a police complaint board or any other institution. So for us, that is what we continue to do, and that is what we ensure that we are able to protect and promote human rights of everybody in this country.
Right. The U.S. State Department report talks about this one issue with the Institute of Public Administration and Management, IPAM, where a female student was stripped naked and was abused, and investigations were set up, but there has still not been any reports or outcome of those investigations. Now, is the Human Rights Commission involved in those investigations at all?
Well, I think I was here in the studio when that incident happened. I came here, we investigated, I went to IPAN, we engaged the police, we condemned clearly the high-handedness of the police during that period. And the police actually came back to say, okay, yes, we understand what happened, and we are going to set up a committee. We are going to investigate the personnel that actually were involved in that misconduct. And so we are very much prominent in ensuring that the police were held accountable. I mean, just after that, a day or two after that, there was a similar incident, but that one actually, although it involved, OSD officers, but then they were actually acting in their own private capacity, IGE, where they
kill someone.
Kill one person. And so the commission also came out, but the police actually investigated, and for that issue, the guy was one of the personnel were actually suspended. He was even sent to court. He was prosecuted. So the commission is concerned that we have not seen the totality or a finished product, if you like, in the case of the IPAN issue. But the police actually promised that they will ensure that they follow up the complete, because the police themselves, they have their own internal mechanisms. They put their personnel on trial, within the police, and at the end of the day, they have recommendations that they do. They have judgments that they deliver. So we were thinking that, we are expecting that the police will conduct that investigation. Those who are actually really culpable, the police officers who are culpable, will be brought to book, and then they come back to the public and inform the public. When we are doing these engagements about this public inquiry, we had to engage the police. The police told us, oh, in fact, these issues that you want to actually put us on inquiry about, we have already dealt with them. We have ensured that some of the police officers have been dismissed from work. Some of them were even downgraded and so on and so forth. But then we told them, come back to the public and inform them. If you say you're doing A, B, and C, but the public is not aware, then the public will assume that you have not done anything.
Can I ask this question? On the way the Sierra Police reacts to some of these things, and the Human Rights Commission by extension, do you see a need to go beyond the fire brigade or knee-jerk approach? When these things happen, you see the police issuing out a statement that, oh, we're investigating, we're doing this. There was a case that the Sierra Police told us, the public, that they've suspended certain police officers. But at the end of the day, in some places you see these officers still working and doing things. So they come, how do we go beyond the fire brigade, that when things happen, because the public is concerned, they come out, oh, these guys have been suspended, these guys have been, after that, nothing comes out of it. How do we go beyond that?
Yes, there's a need to that for that. As a matter of fact, it's not just about the fire brigade thing that you're talking about. We take proactive measures, to ensure that the police is a professional institution. The Human Rights Commission, for instance, has been engaging on several trainings with the police. We have conducted several trainings. Human rights approach to policing, for instance. And we have, 2020, 2021, we engaged them, across the country, in different parts of the country, to ensure that we train them on how they should actually engage the public, how they should use the human rights lens in policing, because the human rights approach to us is the best approach to policing. So apart from what you call the fire brigade approach, we ensure that we take proactive measures, ensuring that we get the police to be much more accountable, ensuring that the police becomes an institution, like they say, a force for good, and indeed force for good. So incidents will occur. When incidents occur, definitely, the Human Rights Commission will just have to come in and investigate and ensure that, the recommendations are made public, and also ensure that the police and any other institution that is involved, is made to aware that these are the issues and these are the recommendations that should actually put on board.
Let me draw your attention, Victor, to the Pademba Road issue, the correctional center that the report talked about. Let me draw your attention to that. Outside the fact that we are in a politically intoxicated society where technically I would say the police is politicized by law because of the Police Act. I like the way the U.S. Embassy puts it, the Sierra Leone Police, which reports to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. We've had proclamations of investigations here and there outside the independent investigation that was done by the correctional service themselves. We've not had anything out of it, but the government promised that investigations were going to be set up and they were going to, and look at how many years now we've not gotten anything out of it, and there's no tangible outcome even from the Human Rights Commission on that issue. So with all of these things happening, the Sierra Leone police many are seeing the Sierra Leone police with an eye of not independent because of the way the laws are. They have to report to Mr. Vice President, who happens to be the chair of the police council, I mean, the SecGen, who happens to be the Minister of Internal Affairs, and the direct supervisor. With all of these things, how are we sure? Because the report said some of these actions are done either by government or in the interest of the government. So how do we get all of that on board?
You know, Samuel, this is a very, if you like, complex issue. First of all, I mean, the way the police force is actually crafted, I mean, where we have the Vice President being head of Police Council,
right,
and then we have the Minister of Internal Affairs supervising the activities of the police. To me, it should not be, I mean, the biggest problem for the ordinarily, when you have a police officer going to quell down riots somewhere in McKinney or in Boo or in Pujol, the Vice President, for instance, is not there. The Minister of Internal Affairs is not there. These are ordinary police officers, you know, police officers who we believe should have the basic training, you know, in how to actually handle firearms. So it's about being a very professional institution and being very professional as an individual. So you have the responsibility each time you are called upon to operate to ensure that you are able to be professional. I mean, nobody tells you, for instance, to go to IPAM and strip a female student naked or half naked, I mean, as it were. It's an individual attitude. So even where we have, for instance, the Chief Justice being appointed by the President, I mean, the judges themselves, they have their own individual contributions towards, I mean, the dispensation of justice. So to me, it's about individual accountability much more than the hierarchy of the police, which sometimes, or in many cases, you know, are not actually present where these incidents actually occur. You know, talking about the Panama incidents, we came out, we went there on the very day, we were there, although, I mean, the place was so tense, we had to be very much, I mean, professional enough to ensure that we don't find ourselves in that kind of situation where, at the end of the day, we may sustain injury. But at the end of the day, we came out with a report, I mean, with a statement, a press statement, and we made some recommendations. Again, like you said, the correctional services, they themselves, they investigated, and they gave us the figures, I mean, how many people we are actually reported to have actually lost their lives, how many inmates, I mean, we are reported to have lost their lives, including one of their
officers, yeah.
Yes. So, to us, that is why we are saying, now the Commission, the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone, is giving an opportunity to any aggrieved party to come before the Commission under this public inquiry. Because the public inquiry spans from 2015 to 2021. So this is the perfect opportunity if anybody thinks, any member of the public, any relative who may have been, friend, whose daughter or child generally may have been affected by that particular incident, to now come to the Commission. We are having a public inquiry. You make your case known, you bring up your evidence as the case may be, and then at the end of the day, we ensure that remedies are taken. Because the issue of impunity is something that the Commission actually is fighting against. We have seen how, you know, I mean, over the years, successively, how incidents have been taking place, and sometimes these people just go, they are not held accountable, you know, and unfortunately, the public will come back to begin to discuss politics. Oh, this is the APC, this is the APC police, this is the SCP police.
Right.
You know, that in itself actually takes away the actual issue. It defeats the purpose of national discourse. So we are saying we have to ensure, as the people, as the states, we have to ensure that we approach issues of national interest different from politics, and ensure that people are held accountable individually for being unprofessional. So if a police officer goes down to IPAN or McKinney, where there was some generator issue, you know, you pull the trigger and I mean, kill somebody, or I mean, the person sustains injury. you should be held accountable squarely because you have a training. You have a professional training that tells you how to use a weapon or when not to even use a weapon. So it is for you to be accountable, to be held accountable, rather than to begin to politicize the whole issue. Oh, I mean, this is the political party that's in power, or because the issue is, no matter the change in power, today there will be this government, tomorrow there will be another party, political party in governance. The police will still remain as an institution. The military will still remain as an institution. NRA will still remain. I mean, all of these institutions will still remain. So we have to approach these issues from the national point of view and not from party lines. Once it becomes a party discussion, political party discussion, then it actually undermines the actual issue. And those who are perpetrators will just walk away free without being accountable. So that is the push of the Human Rights Commission.
All right. Now, away from the police, just for the benefit of our audience, we did attempt to get the police media team to be a part of the conversation, but unfortunately, they were unavailable to comment on the report. So we move on to something else the report talks about, which is the conditions of work here in Sierra Leone. And you know, the report states that there was a national minimum wage, but it fell below the basic poverty line in the country. That's one thing. And it also says that the national minimum wage is 500,000 leones, which is $65. But if we go back in time, I think it was in 2019, the minimum wage was increased and it was meant to be effective 600,000 leones in April 2020. But if we look at the report, it also states that the Ministry of Labor is responsible for enforcing the labor law, including the minimum wage, but the labor inspectors were insufficient to enforce compliance. So I'm wondering if that's an explanation for why the minimum wage is still 500,000 leones in the report.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's hard to point out one causality, right? But that was the information that we had speaking with our partners. I think one of the big trends that you can see, not just in the labor report, but in sort of across all of the categories, is there are laws in Sierra Leone, and most of those laws uphold human rights, and including labor rights, and including all of these other things. Where the issue sometimes falls apart is the enforcement, and as you were just speaking about the police, sometimes there is enforcement, but it takes a long time. So you know, if there's a change to minimum wage in 1 year, it sometimes might take a little while for that to actually come through. So that's sort of one of the broader issues that we saw. But right to assembly, right to form a union, these things exist. The right for pregnant women to not lose their job was something that the labor report also pointed out. And then we have a whole other report on trafficking in persons that touches on some of the labor issues as well.
The report also states there is no prohibition on excessive compulsory overtime, not a requirement for paid leave or holidays. Could you talk about that a little bit and perhaps what that means?
Yeah, so that means that if your employer says that you need to work, you know, 20 extra hours a week or something, there's no sort of cap on how many hours that an employer can require you to work. So that's based on the information that we've had based on our conversations with Ministry of Labor and other people working in this area.
All right, well, stay with us. We still have a bit more to discuss on human rights here in Sierra Leone, but it's 9:15. We have to take a quick commercial break and we'll be back. Stay with us. Right, welcome back to Wake Up Sierra Leone on AYV Television. Don't forget to send your messages to our Facebook page in a short time. Sammy will be reading some messages from our Facebook page. You'll find us at AYV Sierra Leone.
Right. So, let me ask this question. You mentioned the conditions of prisoners, and you also cited a particular case. I mean, where the individual has not even made a day in court, but has spent years behind bars.
Since 2007,
I mean, it's worrisome. I mean, and for facilities meant to hold a little over 1,000, now having 4,000 cross, and one meant for 324, now having 1,500 or so. Where does that put the status of inmates and their right to health, even the right to life?
Yeah, well, I think this is a huge issue, and if you look at the report, it's probably where we spent the most time talking about it, right? It takes up the most section of the report talking about prison conditions. So, yeah, it's if you have prison conditions that don't support the right to life, if you have prison conditions that are so harsh they border on life-threatening, and if it takes a long time for people to get their day in court and to have justice, that makes it really hard to have a system that is responsive to the needs of justice. There are some things that the report cites as improvements in certain prison facilities. There was one example noted where there was improved hygiene, another where prisoners had gotten more access to communicate with their family. So I don't want to paint a picture that there's no improvement and there's no responsiveness. When we have met with the people involved and raised some of these issues, there's been an acknowledgement that things could get better, and there's been, I would say, a will to work on some of the recommendations. The biggest issue is how quickly those recommendations can be implemented, which comes down partially to resources. We do work in this area to some extent. I know just a few weeks ago we had a U.S. expert on the Fulbright program come and work with the judiciary and stayed with them for a month and a half, observed and provided recommendations based on his observations. So there are some areas here that we work with the government of Sierra Leone to help connect them with some best practices and help build things up. But yeah, it's a serious issue for human rights and for access to justice.
Victor, on a personal note, you know better being a lawyer. The report talks about the conditions of inmates. It talks about arbitrary arrest and detention, and even the role of the judiciary, where sometimes bail conditions are super tough. I mean, you have bond fees super tough for people to meet and all of that, and where the police, for example, would hold you behind bars for more than the stipulated period. I mean, the law makes provision for misdemeanors for about 72 hours, and other felonies, I mean, 10 days and so. But we've seen situations where the police would always keep, and sometimes even juveniles spend, I mean, they've spent over time, I mean, from cases we've witnessed, we've seen juveniles spending their time behind bars with adults, hardcore criminals, for example, in police cells. I mean, these are things that are pretty much not okay for the entire criminal justice system. So that's a challenge. What's the role of the Human Rights Commission in ensuring? I know sometimes it's difficult because you can only do as far as recommendation, but how much of an engagement do you on a normal day get with these other institutions? Because if a juvenile is spending, that even threatens his mental status.
You know, it's actually very wrong. It's very wrong. I mean, the laws are very clear. Sometimes the police will tell you, oh, it's difficult to determine the age of this person because a parent will tell you that, oh, this child is about 11 years, 15 years old or 17 years old. I mean, looking at the structure of the child, the police would argue that no, we don't think so. This child should be around 20 or 19. So all of these are very serious challenges, but I mean, the bottom line is no juvenile should be actually be incarcerated together with adults. That offends the law, it offends human rights best practices across the world. And it's not just about also, like you talked about, what's the role of the Human Rights Commission. We do engagement, but the first thing is we monitor, we are able to actually see the actual issues firsthand. I'll give you an example. In 2019, between 2019 and 2020, when we are doing team monitoring, we went to Kenima. We were able to discover a guy who has spent 12 years in prison without an indictment. He never had his day in court for 12 good years. He was just, being treated from one prison cell, from one correctional center to the other for 12 good years. We had to intervene, and then we came down to Freetown. We engaged the office of the DPP and also the Chief Justice. It was only then that the DPP came out of his office. He went to Kenima. He had to conduct a special session, court session on a Saturday for that guy.
Right.
And that was set. He was set free. So, it authenticates what the U.S. Embassy is saying in that particular example. So, this is a very serious challenge, for our criminal justice system,
right.
And it has to be actually, seen as an existential issue, because if you look at the number of people that are behind bars, 60 to 70% actually constitute the young population, the young
right.
people, the youth.
Right.
So if we do not actually take this seriously, then the future of the nation is behind bars. So we have to take very calculative approach to ensure that we are able to address these issues. We're happy that quite recently the Chief Justice brought in the judicial week, where they were able to get some court sittings and address issues of over detention, prolonged detention, and so on and so forth. Several of the inmates were actually put on bail. Some of the kids were even discharged. So these are interventions that we believe should be sustainable, should be sustained going forward, because otherwise, we'll continue to the human rights abuses in these questions centers will continue to.
A few messages just quickly on Facebook. Yaba Star Musa is saying the police. No, is the police the only institution handling human rights issues in our country? What about the legislative and the judiciary? They are there to ensure bills and laws are well formulated, interpreted, and practiced to meet the universally accepted standards. Osfriend Kamara is saying human rights issues such as unlawful or arbitrary killings by the authorities, piloting governance, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, serious and high level of corruption, and women's rights. It is time for developing partners and the present administration and the Human Rights Commission to implement not only soft policies, but rather a hard policy framework that makes human rights violators to be accountable to their deeds. What is happening with the UPR recommendations? Abraham Tommy, hi Junior, is saying good morning Samuel, good morning Antonia. Talking about the Human Rights Commission, Sierra Leone, I'm not seeing anything much like they're doing and so on, because I have witnessed so many incidents where no action has been taken towards it. And also to the police, they are the ones violating the human rights in Sierra Leone. So let Mr. Victor tell us the truth, and also Mr. Victor would like to know more about the Pademba Road saga. Last message because of time. Also, are there any plans by the judicial arm of the government to support the lawyers in the training and study on international laws from a broad modular spectrum? That's from Austrian. Unfortunately, guys, I cannot run through all your messages. Time is not our best friend. But yes, Sarah, as we round up, beyond the recommendations in this report, do you also engage authorities to see where, they're having challenges to implement some of these things that you can come in to see how those bottlenecks can be cleared?
Yeah, absolutely. And to some of those questions around legislation and laws, as we talked about earlier, there are actually laws that promote human rights and restrict some of these things. I think there are some laws that don't exist that maybe could, and some laws that do exist that maybe couldn't. But in general, the issue, I don't think, is primarily the legal framework, because those laws exist. It's the enforcement and follow through on some of that. But as for support, yes. So as I mentioned earlier, at the invitation of the Ministry of Justice, we actually invited a U.S. expert to come and work with with them. They were seconded to the ministry for a period of time. They observed what was the situation and the problems that they had, and then they provided recommendations. Now, this just happened very recently, so I don't know, you know, again, the follow-through, it'll take some time to see results from that. You know, the U.S. Embassy sends around 60 Sierra Leoneans to the U.S. every year on a variety of programs, from Fulbright to international leadership programs, and all of them have aspects of connecting Sierra Leonean leaders with best practices and building those global networks and connections. So it's something that we do work on. USAID also has programs on sort of democracy, governance, and justice that we're looking at. So you know, it takes some time. Results don't come immediately, but I think there is some programs in place. There is some groundwork. It's about sort of working on that follow-through and working on that responsiveness.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And what about you, Victor? What would be your parting shot? I mean, you've heard the messages and the questions.
Yes, I appreciate the Texas. It's always good that we have such engagement. It gives opportunity to citizens to have their say in governance. For us as a commission, we continue to ensure that we engage government to fulfill their state obligation. I mean, including the obligation to protect, to fulfill human rights generally in our country. And people have to understand that the Human Rights Commission does not have arresting powers. We do not make arrests. Because some people normally say, hey, it's a Human Rights Commission Day, but we don't make arrests. So what we are now doing, we are working on our acts. We have already sent the draft instructions to the Office of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. We want to have, much more, enforcement powers. By we are certain that in 1 or 2 months' time we'll be having that act, so that we get much more powers to ensure that our recommendations are actually followed through. You know, they are implemented within a timely manner. So people of Sierra Leone have to continue to trust the independence of the commission. We do our work without any interference, and that is what we pride ourselves on. And we continue to ensure that we work with other stakeholders like the U.S. Embassy and every other institution that actually is working around human rights. Human rights is for everybody. I mean, in governance, you need human rights to protect you.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us this morning.